Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode. I have a guest today. Her name is Shalise. You might know her from Cults to Consciousness, an amazing YouTube channel. She interviews people from across the religious spectrum, from across the cult spectrum. And so, Shalise, thank you so much for coming on today.
Alyssa, thanks for having me. You've just shot up so quick, and we're like, look at this girl just going from 0 to over 200,000 in no time at all. I'm a little jealous, but also like, hats off to you. I'm so happy to see all the progress you've made. You're doing the Lord's work over here, and I'm just honored to be on your show.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. And speaking of the Lord's work, today we are talking soaking.
Oh, the Lord's work. He gave us those parts, we should use them, right?
Exactly. I've wanted to make a YouTube video about this for a while because I just feel like it's a topic that I think any time I've ever posted on the internet about Mormonism, someone makes a soaking joke. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very much in the forefront of people's minds, especially people who aren't Mormon, because of its virality. So today we're talking about what it is, the history of it on the internet, the history of it within Mormonism, and we're also going to be discussing other loopholes, Mormon loopholes in general, not just with sex, but also kind of loopholes across the religious spectrum, because Mormonism is such a rules-based religion that you better
Yes.
believe there's a very long list of loopholes that Mormonism creates within its culture. And I should also add that we will be using some kind of code words merely because sometimes YouTube does not like it when you use words too specifically. So we're going to be using some code words. That is not because we are afraid to say the words. It's because the platform sometimes gives you a penalty for using specific words. Shalise, how would you define soaking?
You're putting this on me. Okay, this is great.
Or I can
Oh,
say if you want.
no, I'll do it. I'll do it. So, also, fun fact for those who don't know me or the channel, I also come from Mormonism. So,
Oh
this is
yes, you
not an
should.
outsider's opinion. I was born and raised in the religion in Utah itself, and I got out around 19. So, there are some things that I have heard about, some things I heard about later, some things that when I moved out of the state, everyone was like, Mormon girls are so kinky, looking at me like wink, wink. And I'm like, what? So naive. So, anyway, that's the perspective that I'm coming from. Okay, so soaking, as far as I'm aware, it is when the man enters the woman in the regular hole, the everyday one, and doesn't thrust, but just lets it lie, just lets it just soak in there. Because if you don't thrust, it doesn't count as sex. We're not saying that we think that, but that's what soaking implies.
Yes, and Mormonism is, to give some background, there is absolutely no sex before marriage, and there is so much shame around sex specifically within the Mormon religion. Premarital sex has been called the sin next to murder
Yes.
before, and so, and even when I was growing up, I'd love for you to share, Shalise. When I was growing up, I was taught basically that you should only kiss someone, your significant other, if you're dating someone, you should only kiss them in the way that you would feel comfortable kissing them in front of your parents or in front of Jesus Christ or God himself. And so it,
What? I didn't get that lesson. I missed that
oh my
day at
gosh.
Sunday school.
You are lucky. And we're going to get into today all the different lessons that go into creating a really strong culture around shame and kind of a very closed off culture around sex and sexuality in general. But yeah, that is the same thing I've heard about soaking, is that basically they are just laying there, both the man and the woman, but it doesn't count because there's no thrusting or moving around at all. And that is also what Wikipedia defines soaking as. That's what Urban Dictionary calls it. And I didn't hear about soaking, honestly, until it went viral a few years ago. I had never, even as a Mormon, even as an ex-Mormon, I had not heard of it. Before we jump into the ins and outs of soaking, or lack thereof, I'm excited to announce this week's video sponsor, which is Aura. It's a really important time to be talking about them because hackers may have stolen the social security numbers of every single American. Over 2.9 billion records were stolen from National Public Data, which offers records to employers, staffing agencies, private investigators, and anyone else looking to do a background check. These stolen records include a person's full name, address, birth date, social security number, and phone number. I've personally experienced having my bank data stolen, and it was such an awful, stressful time of life, and I never want it to happen again, which is why I'm grateful that with Aura, I finally have peace of mind. Aura alerts me if they find my phone number, email, or social security number anywhere on the dark web, and they alert me if any of that information is used to attempt to access my credit or open a bank account. I also love that they offer me up to $5 million of identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. You can go to my link at aura.com/Alyssa Grenfell to try it for 14 days for free. This is enough time for Aura to figure out if any of your personal information has been exposed. I'm not leaving myself or my family exposed to data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to my link at aura.com/Alyssa Grenfell to try it for 2 weeks for free. Had you, before it went viral on TikTok, had you heard of soaking?
No, I laughed very hard though when it came up, and I was like, honestly, I'm not surprised that would be a thing. And people, I know we're going to talk about like, is it real, is it not? When I did an episode on this with Xmolex, first of all, she admitted to doing it. She admitted to soaking, and she was one of the people who went viral for talking about it. And after I did that episode, I had people private messaging me saying, yeah, I was a soaker. So it was a thing, but I think in very close, close groups, niche groups, we're talking BYU, Provo situations where things are so repressed that you do extra mental gymnastics to try and get around the rules to achieve some form of normalcy in gaining a sex drive or exploring your sexuality.
I feel like I've had a lot of conversations with people as well about if it's true or if it's a myth. And I think I'm glad you mentioned Exmo Lex's video. She has a great video from a few years ago that I will drop in a link below. And she explains not just what soaking is, but she says she did it, and she shared kind of what went into this background of being told basically, I think the reason these loopholes exist is that you're given very specific and strict rules about what you can't do. But that means that if there's something that you can kind of think of or come up with that falls outside of that rule, especially to a teenager or a young person, you might feel like that specific thing is okay purely because it wasn't mentioned in the original list of rules. So I think they've updated the word of wisdom to now include weed, for example, even though for a long time weed wasn't in the word of wisdom. And so some people felt like that meant that they could partake because it's of the earth or whatever. When there's such a long list of rules, if it's not expressly written on the list of rules, people sometimes feel like they can partake or take it, be participating in the behavior without sinning, because if it's not on the long list of rules, then it must be okay.
Yeah, and it's also important to mention that it doesn't mean, for all of you outsiders, never Mormons, that every Mormon practiced soaking, right? It's not something that's super common. It's not commonplace at all. It's just something that, again, popped up, I think, as a reaction to the intense restrictions placed on certain individuals that maybe were more intense restrictions than other mainstream Mormons. So I feel like it's important to mention that, oh, I have a neighbor. Does that mean they've soaked? Probably not, but we're talking about it because it's also important to recognize why things come about and kind of the reactions of just a normal biological impulse when you're restricting that so heavily, why things like this come up and why they feel like they're able to do the mental gymnastics to justify it, even though, again, huge disclaimer, the Mormon Church would never say soaking is allowed just because they've never written it down. It's clearly against the rules. We know that, mentally, but sometimes it's just so hard to follow those rules that you create these loopholes for yourself?
I took to Reddit and I posted on the ex-Mormon subreddit a question. I did a poll: is soaking real or is it a Mormon myth? And we had 106 votes, and 11 people said yes, it's real. I know people who did it, or I did it myself. 46 people said maybe it's real, it's prevalent enough that it can't be totally made up. And 49 people, so the bulk, most, the highest percentage basically, said it's a myth made up by people who are bored, which is what I wrote. So, but 11 people voted that it is real. And to me, the reason why this is a difficult question to answer is purely because Mormonism makes sex and sexuality so taboo to talk about that you may very well know someone, a close friend within your Mormon community, who did something like soaking or broke the law of chastity in some way that was a little bit based on a loophole they perceived, and they wouldn't. It's not like they would tell you. Typically, you only confess sexual sins. Sexual sins, to be clear, neither of us believe that premarital sex is a sin, or sins even really technically exist, but you only confess those to your bishop. And so I feel like the reason why I would say I thought it was a myth kind of before doing some of this research is just because I personally can honestly say I never did it, and I don't know anyone personally who did it either.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think again, because I was like, wait, I was born and raised Mormon in Utah. How did I not hear of this? But like I kind of alluded to in the intro, when I moved to Vegas for college, I had all of these nevermos being like, oh my gosh, Mormon girls are so kinky. Like, you have the weirdest loopholes. And I'm like what? And that's when I learned about the poop hole loophole. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing, because I feel like I left Utah early enough to where I didn't really experience that college life, like that BYU life, where everything is so in a vacuum and so amplified, I guess you could say. So when I left at 18, I was just like, what are they talking about? And I was also very much a goody good, where my sexual confessions up until that point, and we could get to the last one, which you have on your list here to talk about, which is my sexual confessions were like, I was laying on my boyfriend and kissing, and we like moved around a little bit because I was too embarrassed to say we were. I think you have it on your list too. Levi Levin, or like dry humping is what we call dry farming, is the one that we use because we were out in the sticks with cornfields and cows.
Oh
So I'd
my
be
gosh.
like, I was too embarrassed to say we were dry farming, but I was like, it's kissing. Can I go to the temple, please, and do baptisms for the dead? And so those were my sexual sins. So I didn't really dip any toes into that pool of all these loopholes that I heard about later. But I mean, these are people who aren't Mormon, have no reason to really make this up, and they're just like, yeah, every girl that I dated from Utah was so kinky, like everything she would do but sex was crazy.
So funny. Yeah, I do feel like, kind of along with what you're saying, I feel like there's a huge undercurrent of people, I think specifically, so Levi loving being when you're on top of each other and kind of perform, like mimicking movements without actually
Yeah,
taking your
you're
clothes
like
off.
humping each other.
Yes, and I think that kind of goes in with all of it, which is to say that when you're in college, you're now an adult. You're dating for marriage, and you're not allowed to have sex before you're married. I will say I've asked many ex-Mormons if they if they did have sex before they got married, and basically everyone has said no, I did not have sex before I got married in the temple. So most people that I've spoken with that I'm close to have said they didn't break the number one cardinal rule, which is don't have sex, but almost all of them will say I did kind of do a lot of things leading up to it, but I just knew that was the door, like, that's the one thing the line I'm not gonna cross, essentially.
Oh yeah, they get really good at foreplay, and which great, like the world needs more foreplay in its life. But like you said, they will do everything up to, like, I know people who did naked cuddling, but they're not actually penetrating, so it's okay. And do we have to tell the bishop? Like, kind of gray area. But once you have penetration, it's, you have broken the sin next to murder. you were messing with procreation, which is the worst thing you could possibly do before you're married. And I mean, if you read any of The Miracle of Forgiveness by Spencer W. Kimball, you know that even if you're assaulted, he says it's better to die fighting for your virtue than to let someone assault you. That's insane. Like the weight
So
that they
insane.
put on virtue, like the quote virtue, especially on the women, is just so it's wrong in my opinion.
I completely agree. And even the miracle of forgiveness, I think, is burned into all of our memories. And people have said to me before that, they kind of are phasing it out. I was asked to read it before my mission,
Yeah.
but I'm not that old. And so I read the whole thing. And he also mentions basically that women shouldn't be permitted to wear shorts, among other things, and says that, if you spend too much time masturbating, it'll make you gay. So there's all sorts
Right.
of misconceptions very present in that book. And I think that the prevalence of a book like that and how often people bring up quotes from that book is why people are so freaked out about sex, and why I think it's so something that's very taboo. Even before I got married, I was married in the Mormon temple, and before I got married, you're required to do a special interview that takes place right before your wedding, where essentially they ask you for a final time if you've been living the law of chastity. So typically, once you get a temple recommend, you only need to have that interview once a year, and then you get your temple recommend re-upped, and then you're allowed to enter the temple. But before you get married, they have a special interview set up just a few days, basically the Sunday before your wedding, where you have to once again go before a man of the church. For me, it was probably a man that was about 70 years old, and he stares at you in the eyes and asks, have you broken the law of chastity? Are you still worthy for a temple marriage? And that is a level of in your business that is kind of
Hmm.
unparalleled, in my opinion, that they set a special chastity interview for right before your wedding when you're Mormon.
Right. Also, because what if you say no? It depends on your bishop. They may cancel your wedding. Or they may be like, okay, slap on the wrist, just don't do it again before you go to the temple. It just depends on who you get. And it's almost like they're setting you up for failure or lying because also you're engaged. It's not like you're hooking up with everyone around town. You found your eternal companion and you're ready to get married and you're making this covenant in the temple to the Lord. It's like the highest priority on the list of being Mormon. And then they still prod into your life.
Yeah, you'd think that if they are so worried about chastity, like you're saying, it would be a little bit more like, well, are you sleeping with a different guy every night? The fact that I, as a 23-year-old woman, had to tell a 70-year-old man that I was living the law of chastity before I was permitted to have my wedding, that's basically the most regressive religious idealism I could think of. I mean, sometimes there's certain things that I remember about my Mormon upbringing that I'm like, oh, that's pretty bad. I looked back in the history of the internet to figure out, just try to see how long soaking has been a thing. Because like I said, I hadn't really heard of it until it went viral a few years ago. And I'm working on a blog, and I had someone give me suggestions as to what I could talk about for my blog, and like what topics to cover. And the volume for people searching for soaking is very high. Like the number of people who are Googling soaking or Mormon soaking it's a crazy amount of people. So I think that people are very curious about it. The earliest mention of soaking I could find on Urban Dictionary was 2006. So that's it's been around for a long time as a
Yeah.
term. In addition, the term provo push is from 2006, is the first entry for the provo push. So provo push is basically Levi loving, as we've already described, I would say. And then I found a reference to soaking in this 2007 article, which is from a Mormon erotica blog.
Nice.
So I was pretty surprised by how often, by how early on this idea of soaking was on the internet, because it's obvious that it wasn't just invented by some crazy non-Mormons or by one random Mormon.
Yeah.
This is something that's been very prevalent for a very long time.
Yeah. And are we going to talk about the step two of soaking if you're an overachiever?
The what?
the step 2 of soaking if you're an overachiever? Do you want me
Yes,
to tell
let's
them?
yes, let's get into the third party that may or may not be
Yeah.
present.
So it's called earthquaking, or I think there's another name for it too, but earthquaking is the one that I heard of. And this typically happens in dorm rooms with bunk beds, so it's a little easier to do. So the soaking couple is on the top bunk. You bring in a third party, maybe they're pretending to be asleep or something. And while they're soaking, the bottom party kicks the bed with their feet and makes it move, so it's kind like you kind of get a little bit of friction, but you're not doing it, so it doesn't count.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've heard of that called jump humping. Jump humping, right? I think that's the other thing I've heard it referred
Yeah.
to as. Or I mean, honestly, there's so many terms that people come up with for stuff like this because people just think it's hilarious to talk about. That
Yeah.
yes, I've definitely heard of that. Or somebody who's bed shaker is another one I've heard. Someone that's shaking the bed to provide friction. I think in Exmo Lex's video, she says she's never heard of anything like that of in real life. I also think that that's, if soaking is like some people do it, 11 out of the 100 people and the survey said they did it or they know someone. I think jump humping is like, or bed shaking is definitely made up. But what do you think?
I think, you know what, I'm trying to remember back when I did that video with her. I feel like someone reached out and was like, "Yeah, I've done this," or "My roommates did it." Again, like, who knows for sure? But the fact that it's out there, it's like, maybe it's true. I don't know. I just think it's a really funny visual. And again, this is not to be like, let's make fun of Mormons because they do weird things. It's just we're addressing the rumors, talking about what's in the realm of the Exmo space or even the Mormon space, just adding our thoughts. Like you said, I don't know how true that one is, but it is out there as a rumor.
Yeah, I think too from what I have gathered on the internet, I feel like people who are interested in this topic, first of all, they're usually people who are maybe already looking for other types of erotic material and are usually men, which is why I haven't made a video about this yet. And I'm glad we could talk about it together because it feels a little bit less stigmatized to me or weird
Yeah.
to make content online about it. But I think that it's definitely fetishizing repression, in my opinion, from the outside looking in to kind of say, oh, like, isn't it so kind of hot or sexy, like kinky, like you were saying, those guys said to you, that these girls are so repressed that they do weird things. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that is at the heart of why the whole soaking conversation is actually very sad, because even if whether soaking is or is not true, or how many, what percentage of people have actually engaged in that, I think it is hitting on something that there's a certain group of people who really like to fetishize people who are repressed and kind
Mm-hmm.
of delve into that as a genre of material that they enjoy watching for reasons. And so I think that, to me, that's why I wanted to talk about it, though, is that it kind of, I think, serves as a way to destigmatize the fact that this shouldn't be something that is like a funny joke, or it shouldn't even be something that is a fetish, in my opinion. I think it's something that reveals a really systemic issue with what a culture of chastity creates in its members.
Exactly. And I think this is the perfect part to mention. Someone just commented on one of my videos about soaking. I think it was something I did with my fiance. Anyways, they said that it's actually a thing outside of Mormonism, and I wish I would have remembered the name or written it down, but it's actually called something in regular fetish world where you just soak. So I just had to point that out, that it actually is a real fetish outside of religion.
That's super fair, and I completely believe it. And I think, and there's a whole, the people who have made TikTok videos about this, they get millions of views. There was a girl that made TikTok videos about the bed shaking, and everyone thought she was being for real. Everyone thought she was a real BYU student, and her account is now deleted. And if you go on the Know Your Meme page online where it talks about soaking, which I'll link below, it basically says it's pretty much confirmed that she was never a Mormon. She's not Mormon at all. She was just making viral videos to make like that as a joke and pretending to be Mormon. And so I
Okay.
think that that's another piece of the whole soaking conversation, is that I think that a lot of people who get in on the joke have no connection with Mormonism. They just see it as something viral and funny that they want to participate in. I don't know if you've seen those BYU interviews with that guy who makes BYU students look crazy, and he asks a lot of them about
Oh.
soaking. So I swear that half the kids he interviews are not Mormon. I think he just finds people from California or wherever he's from, and he just brings them on, and because they all are admitting to soaking. And I'm sure you would already know what happens to people who would admit to having sex or something like sex at BYU. If they're doing it before they're married, they would get kicked out.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know why, well, I guess I could speculate as to why I blocked this out. But I don't mind sharing because I do think it's important, especially going back to fetishizing the repression and kind of making fun of something that's a real issue. So when I was halfway out of the church, like on my way of leaving the church, I got a non-Mormon boyfriend, and he actually forced himself on me in a way that, for my first time, I didn't want that. And he did it in a way of basically soaking. So I didn't even realize that he had entered. But by the time it was over, I was like, wait, did we just have sex? I mean, I knew that it was sex. I cried. It was awful. And he was like, I thought you wanted that. I was like, no, I was waiting till I was married. Even though I was trying to leave Mormonism, something in me was like, no, 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 this is bad. This is bad. So in a roundabout way, because I didn't really understand boundaries, I didn't understand how to say no. I didn't understand that I could just stop something when it had gone too far, because you're supposed to please the guy and you can't just stop it because that's not allowed, or like no one told me that it was okay to do something like that. So in a roundabout way, I guess I have soaked. It was my first time, and it's really sad that that had to be the case, because if we just would have had open and honest conversations about sex and boundaries and consent, maybe I would have had a completely different experience, rather than just allowing something to happen even though I didn't really want it to, and knowing full well that it was sex and I was probably going to have to repent for it, but am I going to hell anyway? Or, I'm leaving the Mormon church, and that's probably why this happened to me, because I dated someone who was not Mormon. So I think that's also the dark side that people don't really consider when talking about soaking, is that it just creates this really dark place for people to fall into if they have no education or language or understanding of how to say no in a situation like that.
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry that happened to you. That sounds awful.
Thank you.
Especially, I think when you are so uneducated about sex or about bodies or about what's the difference between men versus women, things like that, I think are much more likely to happen. And it's why it's really important for even, teenagers, for kids, and to know the names of their body parts and to know what consent is, because when you can't even articulate that you had something happen to you that you didn't want, it's you're out of control. You're basically a potential victim.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, abstinence only is just dangerous in my opinion. Now, that's not to say that I'm like, go have sex, boys and girls, like with whoever you want and how many people you want. I'm not advocating for the opposite, but I'm advocating for education and awareness around sex. This is how you get pregnant, ladies. This is what ovulation is. I didn't know any of that stuff until I became an egg donor. Like, oh, there's only a few days out of the month that I actually get pregnant. That would have been useful to know. This is what birth control is, and these are your options. Stuff like that that can really be empowering, so that when people choose to have sex by their own consent and their own volition, they are understanding what they're getting themselves into. Still teach them about STDs or STIs and things that they can run into, because abstinence only just creates a lot of repression, a lot of loopholes, a lot of guilt, shame, and potential sexual assault victims.
and what's more, teaching that sex is supposed to be
Yeah.
pleasurable. I think it's important to talk about STDs and important to talk about consent and all of the dangers. But I also think it's really sad that there's no education around, especially for women, like what is to be expected as a woman, how to have a pleasurable experience.
Right.
And basically, like you said, if you've kind of only been taught that you should say yes to men and that men are the ones who are kind of leading and you're the one that's following, you never can learn how to have a pleasurable experience. And so I
Right.
think that that's another huge aspect of education, is that if you're just kind of moving through life in a black box and have no idea about anything, you are at risk to be a victim, but you're also kind of kept from ever having a healthy and full sex life either.
Exactly. And layering on top of that before we move on to other loopholes, which is the fact that it's demonized and outright punishable to explore your own body. So you are told essentially in a roundabout way that your sexuality belongs to your partner because you can't enjoy yourself unless you're with somebody else. So I couldn't just go explore my own body and see what I like and see what feels good and what doesn't feel good because that's a sin. So then you put these two people together who don't know what they like, don't know how to please the other person. All they've ever known is no, 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 no. Now you're married, go populate and replenish the earth. It's like, how do we do this? You know, I think it adds a layer of not understanding your own body, not understanding what can be possible, like you said, how to be pleasured, how to pleasure somebody else, and make it a positive experience. I think that's just something that's also really harmful, is demonizing masturbation. I'll be the first to say it. Go masturbate and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I forget who said it, but I saw a clip of a woman who said that, you know, we're taught sex is disgusting, but to save it for the one you love, or sex is a sin, but save it for the one you love. And it's really, I think that's definitely what I experienced, where it's so demonized to do anything more than a quick peck on the cheek or peck on the lips, that when you are finally married and on your wedding night and then thereafter, it's really hard to get over the mental block that you've been told your whole life, which is that sex is dirty and sex is
Yeah.
bad. And I think that also, and even your own body. I think I always felt so ashamed of my body because I was so constantly messaged that my body was leading men into temptation if I
Right.
wore a tank top or my skirt was above the knee a little bit, that I was giving sinful thoughts to the boys or men around me. And so I felt like I hated my body. I hated being a woman. I hated having a body that might cause other people to sin. It's very going from 0 to 100, where you're told it's a sin, it's bad, it's the sin next to murder, and then suddenly it's great, procreate, have as many babies as you can, do it all the time, and you know, go at it.
Yeah, especially when, I know we're going to get into this, I don't know if now's a good time, when they even said oral sex among married couples is wrong. That little period of time where they were telling married couples from the pulpit, you can't have oral sex anymore and you have to confess to a bishop if you have. And people were so outraged that they were like, oh, okay, never mind, you can do whatever you want if you're married. So that actually carried over and affected me with my whole situation. It basically led me out of the church, that little rule
Oh my
there.
gosh.
Essentially, I was dating someone for a year. I lived in Vegas. I was 19, the prime age to get married. I was ready to go. This was my eternal companion. He was also Mormon. Everything was great. And then he was like, hey, babe, you should like do the thing. And I'm like, are you sure? I don't want to get us in trouble. Like, it's a big deal. We shouldn't do that. Oh, come on. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. So I do the thing happily because I enjoyed it. And immediately after, he was just like, oh, we need to go repent. And I'm like, oh, so mad. So mad. Like,
Rude.
immediately. And of course, if one person confesses, takes two. So, like, I don't have a choice. So, anyway, the bishop just made me feel like the worst person on the planet. He's like, it's unnatural and it's gross and it's da 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 da. And I was like, we didn't even have sex. I was still a virgin and I was so proud of it. And he was like, it doesn't matter. It's sinful. It's unnatural. It's nowhere in the Bible. Just like making me feel like a crappy human being. And I was like, it's not that big of a deal. It's just kissing on another part of the body. He's like, no, Shalise, it's far more serious than that. I didn't know that he was working off the programming of this was a rule once upon a time. And he was just continuing it on for some reason and he punished me for the same amount of time as if I had had sex. And I was like, I
Oh
should
my
have just had
goodness.
sex. This would have been way better. I was so mad because also I wanted to marry this man. He even told me to break up with him because I was a bad influence, that I should change jobs because I was working on Sundays. And, what are the things that are leading you down the wrong path, Shalise? And you're not spiritual enough. And basically, I went home and felt like shit. And that's when I decided to Google the Mormon church. And that's when I decided to leave it.
Oh my God. Yeah. I don't have the exact same story, but in a similar story, I had a guy who, when I was dating him when I was about 16, 17, where he was like, let's do this, touching over the clothes, basically. We'll do, it'll be fine. It's fine. It's fine. Totally putting my guilty conscience at ease. And then as soon as, we're walking home that night, he's like, I think we need to confess to the bishop. And
Oh,
I feel like in this, it's the same thing where it's like, which, I guess who can really blame teenagers? Who can really blame two people who are, into each other for wanting to explore each other? It's not the craziest thing, but it adds this whole other layer of guilt and even feeling really frustrated towards this person and feeling like manipulated. And I did confess to my bishop, and my bishop was probably, I would say, a 60 something year old man. And whenever you confess to a bishop, also typically they ask you a lot of follow-up questions. So it's
yeah.
not just oh, bishop, I want to confess I broke the law of chastity. And the bishop says, no taking the sacrament for 3 to 5 weeks or whatever. Usually it's, oh, I broke the law of chastity. How did you break it? How many times? Who was it with? Did you enjoy it? Do you feel guilty about it? Where
Did
did
you
it happen?
orgasm? Did he
Yes.
ejaculate? And it also depends on the
Yeah.
bishop. Some bishops get really gross and kinky because I think they're getting off on listening to teenagers talk about their sex lives. And it's so disturbing. And little side note for those who are like, oh, but it's okay because now bishops interviews, you don't have to go in alone. You can have your parent. Okay, I would love to explain how I gave head to my boyfriend with my mother in the room. That's so much better. Thank you.
Yeah, these are things that you should probably just never have to talk about unless maybe you're
Yes.
talking to a doctor about protection.
Yes.
But I feel like the difficulty too about wanting to talk about these things is that you are very heavily penalized by whether it's your bishop or your parents. You're gonna get in trouble if you're doing anything besides quick peck on the
Yeah.
lips or whatever with your very serious boyfriend. And so it does incentivize this loophole culture where if you can figure out a way to engage in behaviors that kind of satisfy you without having to feel like you have to confess, you basically, it's just the best version of cognitive dissonance is a great loophole because you can enjoy the experience and enjoy the choice to engage in something without having any of the guilt. And I think that
Yeah.
the cognitive dissonance is what keeps people kind of wanting to engage while still not having to confess to doing anything.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. People just feel like, well, I don't have to confess because this wasn't technically in the rules. I was actually a part that same singles board because the bishop was a drag. He gave us this little sheet after that meeting of all the rules that we couldn't do that I had never heard of before. And so the things that you were just talking about, like, oh, they didn't explicitly say, they explicitly said on this bright orange piece of paper that was like, you can't be alone with each other after midnight because the Holy Ghost goes to bed at midnight. And I'm like, is that Pacific time or Eastern time? And he's like, you can't enter the threshold of someone's bedroom, or you can't kiss while laying down. You can't hug longer than 3 seconds. I mean, honestly, these are things that you would talk to with, like, I don't know, a 12-year-old, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this until you're older. But we're grown adults here living in our own apartments, and they're impressing these rules on us. And I'm just like, wow, thanks, dude. This is what you want our couple life to be. We've been together over a year. This is what you want. So I was really
Yeah.
petty about it. All those extra rules, I was so petty.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that that the oral sex thing that we were talking about earlier, that was a letter from the first presidency. The prophet wrote a letter. He penned the letter about not having that oral sex is like unnatural, basically. So this
Yeah.
isn't, these are real kind of press releases that are being put out. And my husband always talks about his experience with this pamphlet called, it's not called the Little Factories pamphlet, but that's the nickname.
Oh, the
I think
little
it's called,
factory
it's
talk.
called To Young Men Only. And
Yeah.
it's basically about how you shouldn't masturbate and how the body will take care of it through something called a wet dream. And then after that, don't worry about anything after that because the body will take care of it itself. And it's basically, it also goes into like what you should do if you're in a group of boys and all the boys are touching each other. And like, it's so
Wait,
specific.
what? I didn't
Yes,
know
it's
that part.
I was reading back over it for our conversation today, and there's just some like crazy art of a temple and a wedding ring, and it also talks about once again how masturbating or co-masturbating makes you gay. I mean, this is so wildly specific to me that it always feels like almost like there's these apostles are speaking from firsthand experience.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, you certainly know a lot about masturbating with your friends. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
I've heard of Mormon missionaries, men, the elders keeping a picture of Jesus in the shower so that if they feel tempted to touch themselves in the shower, they are face to face with Jesus. So they don't. There's
Yikes.
so many examples like that where of what people will do, the lengths they'll go to, like to basically have a chastity belt on at all times so that they never fall into temptation. And
Yeah.
it's so silly because at the end of the day, like very, just it's okay. This is very normal human behavior that we've very much
Yes.
demonized and makes people act crazy.
Yes. So I was going to ask you, I don't know if we mentioned this already. We did an interview together on my channel about your story and your mission. Go there after this if you're starting here. I was going to ask you, and I forgot. I was told that men are on their mission are supposed to clap while they're in the shower so their companion knows they're not masturbating. Did you have to do anything like that?
I feel like God doesn't know women can masturbate, honestly.
Thank you. Right. It's never talked about for women.
Just
That's why I was
never.
wondering if that was a rule for you.
Yeah, no, I never had anyone address that to me at all. I don't think even through me getting married, I don't think I had one person ever bring up the fact that women masturbate at all.
Oh,
But
jeez.
there were definitely jokes. I would hear elders making jokes about like clapping, because as you may know, for anybody who's watched my videos about Mormon missionaries, you have to be with each other 24/7, sight and sound. You sleep in the same room. I talked a lot about my mission on my video with Shalise earlier today that we're releasing at the same time. So definitely check that out after watching this. But because the only time you can be alone as a Mormon missionary is to use the restroom or to shower. So I definitely heard elders making jokes to each other about clapping either in the bathroom or the
Yeah.
shower so that your hands are occupied, so that it's certified. Since I was not a man, I don't know if they actually did that, but I wouldn't be surprised if some do because they get crazy about following the rules.
Yeah. So funny that you mentioned that God doesn't know women can masturbate because I didn't know that that was possible. Every time I heard about masturbation, I'm like, oh, yeah, the guy thing. I didn't even know I had that capability. And when I found out, I was like, whoa, I've been doing this the whole time. That's what that is. I didn't know that I had that option.
After I started dating my first ever boyfriend, I had this experience where we were making out and he shuddered and very suddenly grabbed a blanket and put it over him and said, "You need to leave now," very abruptly. And he walked me
Hmm.
to the door while holding the blanket over
Hmm.
him and was like, "Good night," and closed the door in my face. And I legitimately thought I had like offended him somehow because I was so naive. And of course he's not going to tell me what's going on. And so I remember feeling like this must be related to, I have this like background of my sex ed classes that I got at school, which is my only reference point to actual education on this topic. And so I brought the human encyclopedia into the bathroom and looked up erection and just was like, oh, that's what it is. And I read like this is what it is. And the fact that I have to sneak a book into a bathroom so that I
A
can
medical
read
book.
a medical book just shows how afraid I was to seek information on this topic, or even to trust and go to my mom, go to my sister, just to ask someone. I was that sure that I shouldn't even mention it to anyone, that I'm going to great lengths to figure it out on my own in a way that I can keep completely private.
Yeah, well, body parts are completely demonized, like you said. We're not even encouraged to look in fact, I remember them saying you shouldn't take a mirror to your anatomy. Like, don't even know what's down there. Don't clean it too hard or it might go off or something. Like, they want you to be afraid of your genitalia because they don't want you figuring out that it's pretty great.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too, on top of that, I remember all of the licked cupcake lessons about,
Oh, yes.
jokes about, like, to be more specific, there's two lessons that I received. The first is the lick cupcake lesson, where the female leader brings to young women a bunch of cupcakes, and then she licks one and offers it to all the girls, and then basically says that this is what it is when you have premarital sex. You're a licked cupcake, and
Nobody
nobody
wants
wants a
you.
dirty cupcake. And the other one is chewing gum, which is everyone, puts the gum in the mouth. Who wants this gum now? Nobody wants the gum. And of course, this is once again your body on sex, premarital sex. So, and of course, too, like there's a scripture about how a virtuous woman is worth more than rubies. Her worth is above rubies. So I feel like all of that too is also very makes you feel like if you do have any questions, or if you do have any experiences with a boyfriend, you just feel like, I can't admit to it. I can't ask questions like, what is this? What's happening? What's happening to my body? Even periods. I had a Mormon friend say that, her mom wouldn't let her use tampons because it would
Oh my
stretch her
gosh.
out and would make it so she wasn't a virgin anymore. And I was just like, I don't even know what a virgin is at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole object lesson thing is so damaging because let's also just unpack the fact that we're comparing women to objects in the first place. So you are as good as this object to be used for a specific purpose. And if you use yourself in a different purpose, then your object is worthless. It's just I wish we would have had the crumpled up money lesson, right? Like, even if you crumple it up, it's still worth $20. You know what I mean? Like, how about,
Yeah,
like,
if
it's
you're gonna
okay.
objectify me, at least objectify me to
Yeah,
something that holds value.
exactly. Because they're not understanding, too, that you may have girls there who have been assaulted, and how are they feeling? They're like, oh, wow, I didn't even choose
Yeah.
this and I'm worthless. Now what? I
I
guess I'm
think
just going to
it's
be a chewed piece of gum.
I think it's why a lot of, I saw on the X-Mormon subreddit the other day a girl who got married at, I think, 16 or 17 to a 20-year-old because they had sex and her parents basically forced them to get married because, in a more traditional religious belief about the law of chastity, because you're a single use object, you have to basically marry the first person you sleep with. And so that's kind of another layer of this, is that in more traditional versions of Mormonism, they would say they have to get married in a kind of a shotgun wedding
Yep.
situation, because once your virtue is lost to one boy, he's got it for good. So you might as well get married and have babies. And a lot of times those are men who were, pushing themselves and assaulting
Abusive.
the girls. Yeah.
Yeah, not to mention because of the lack of education, because of the lack of access to birth control or the demonizing of birth control. Like, my daughter can't be on birth control because that means that she's going to be having sex, not my kid. So I remember in Utah, so many teen pregnancies, so many. And I've heard stories and I know of people who were just shipped away for 9 months, mysteriously, like, oh, they went to go live with their Aunt Bertha and they came back a little depressed and a little different. They had a child and didn't want anyone to know because their image is worth everything and you can't let anyone know that something happened to you. And so you're just putting these young girls in these impossible situations rather than just, again, empowering them, teaching them about safe sex, teaching them about birth control, teaching them about consent, and that they have the option to say no. It's not just abstinence only. And if you want to wait, great, please do. But just know that if you don't wait, it doesn't mean that you are a chewed piece of gum.
I think the other part of this conversation that feels important is the aspect of being gay or queer. I mean, there's the thing that
Absolutely.
is recently going viral of My Husband's Not Gay, where they actively are saying, hey, if you're gay, you should probably just get married to a woman, because you
Yep.
can either get married to a woman if you're a gay guy, or you can live a life of celibacy. So there's a lot of people who end up in relationships that are heterosexual relationships, even though they are 100% not interested in that person in that way. And I mean, how awful to just be consigned to a life with a person that you're not attracted to at all, and then to have kids with them, and just pushing yourself down this road that is obviously something that makes you very unhappy and even like suicidal.
Exactly. I've interviewed people like that. In fact, one of them, he was from a break-off fundamentalist group of Mormonism, but he was basically forced to get married, have 7 children, and they were trying to force another wife on him. And he's like, bro, I don't even want this first one. Like, I'm not even straight. And they literally told him, well, it's probably because you eat too much chicken. Like, crazy stuff. Obviously, this is an extreme example in a fundamentalist group, but I just wanted to point out that I've interviewed people who've had to do that. And it's horrible. It's torment to them. And we're also not even mentioning asexuality. Some people who are like, what is the deal with all this purity culture? Like, I don't even want a part of it, but they're forcing it on me. Like, they want me to have children, and I don't want to do that. So there's so many more perspectives to this conversation, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's so important to get a full picture of the damage that this one idea can do. Again, not saying that you shouldn't be abstinent until you're married if that's what you choose, but the damage that it can do and the ripple effects that it causes when you force it on a group of people and you repress them so much. In fact, I've heard people talk about the gay cuddle parties that exist with Mormon leaders who are like, okay, if you're in a mixed orientation marriage, we'll allow you to go to this gay cuddle party. It's on the DL, like super underground, but they have places in Provo where men can go and cuddle with each other to get their fill, according to them, just so that they can continue to push through in this mixed orientation marriage that they don't want to be in.
That is so sad.
More loopholes.
Yeah. And it's like, I really wish that, I wish it was as straightforward, which is what a lot of people say, which is just leave. If you're not happy, you should just leave. And it's very short-sighted to say, that someone who's in this culture should just leave, because so much of your identity and your family and your culture and your community is all piled up onto Mormonism when you're a
Yeah.
member of the church. And so to just leave is to basically say, just never see your family again, or just have your family perpetually upset at you. And I think it's very simplistic way of viewing it. I think the other irony of Mormonism specifically is that Joseph Smith was sleeping with all these different girls. Joseph Smith had all these, 30 plus wives, the youngest of which was 14. And the fact that Joseph Smith originated a religious belief that is very much rooted in sex and having sex with many different people, and in a way that is, he's sleeping with women who are already married to other living men, he's with young girls. And the fact that we now in this version of Mormonism are told don't kiss unless you are just giving a quick peck on the cheek, it's obviously that it's not about sex and enjoying sex. It's about power, and it's about, maintaining control over a group using young brides. But I think that's also the other irony about the Mormon chastity, is like that the outcome is jokes about soaking,
Right. John Dehlin said this, I think it was the first time we did a video together. He's like, if you can control someone's biological impulse, which is having sex, which is next to just needing to drink water, have food, of course, unless you're asexual and that's not your thing. But if you can control their biological urge, you can get them to do anything. It's crazy. If you can, honestly, I feel like Mormonism is a sex cult on the DL, because it's so focused on sex. It's focused on don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex, get married, have sex, have sex, have sex, have all the kids, bring down the spirits from heaven, You know, you've probably seen Saturday's Warriors. You got all these children up in heaven who are waiting to have bodies, and it's your responsibility to bring down as many as possible. Birth control, I don't know if you should do that because you need to bring down as many souls as possible. Ladies, your only job is to bring down as many souls as possible. And then even there is issues. What if women can't have kids? What if they don't want kids? You know, there's so many things that make it problematic. And again, if that's what you want and you want to have all the kids, amazing, do that. But let's not force it on people or tell them that they're less worthy or less than if they don't.
Yeah. I mean, even this like swinging Mormon mommies, the Secret Lives of Mormon Moms
Oh,
thing, I think
geez.
the same way where, it's ironic that Joseph Smith is literally getting with women who are already married, and now Mormons are up in arms about women who are swinging. And,
Yeah.
there's just so many, like, it's like they can't see the forest for the trees, and why this is, even in general, I've heard that swinging is huge in Utah, and the swinging subreddit in Utah is massive, and there's all of these stories of people getting approached or asked to join. And whenever we create cultures that are hyper strict but still very focused on sex,
Yep.
it creates a group of people who are going to be hyper focused on sex and are going to look for ways to participate that that can kind of beat around the bush of getting in trouble. I know that you said you have some other Mormon loopholes that you were thinking about sharing, one about garments specifically.
Yeah, so I think the garments thing is interesting. I never had to wear them, thank the Lord Jesus, because I just don't think I could have done it. I'm very much into fashion. I went to school for fashion design. I lived in Vegas. It was so hot, and I remember that was like the one thing that I'm like, I won't drunk, I won't drink, I won't smoke, I won't have premarital sex, but I'm wearing my shorts and my tank tops because it's too hot and I don't want to wear shirts underneath. So the garment thing would have just ripped me apart. But basically, you're supposed to wear them 24/7 unless, and correct me if I miss one, unless you're swimming, unless you're working out, or what's the other, showering. Is there another one?
Yeah, the three S's is what people say. So
Oh,
the
okay.
three S's:
Sex.
swimming, sex, and showering. And then whenever I say that, people add the fourth with it, which is pooping, but the other word, shitting.
Oh my gosh, so funny. Yeah, so when my grandma's generation was growing up, you had to keep an arm in your garments while you were like showering the other arm. Like you couldn't even take them off to shower, and you couldn't take them off to have sex either. So rules are changing, but I always remembered that if you're working out, like dancing, because I grew up a dancer, you didn't have to wear them. Our dance instructor never had them on, right? And I was like, oh, it's fine. She's wearing her workout clothes. But recently they doubled down on that, and I took some screenshots from the article, and I think it's funny. Hi, Oscar. Sorry. I think it's interesting because it was like a leaked memo that was supposed to go out to the stake presidents about doubling down on women who just wear their yoga pants all day but don't actually work out, but it's just a way to not have to wear your garments. And a memo went out that were like, we need to crack down on this. In fact, they said that it needs to be a temple interview question now. And there was an article on churchnews.com. Summer Rain sent it to me. She's fantastic, does stuff with John DeLynn all the time. She sent it to me and it got taken down. So I'm like, this is interesting. This is one of the garment things. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the workout clothes is a big example, and it's crazy how much rules around garments have changed over the years, even the size of garments. So they used to go
Oh,
to wrist to
yes.
ankle, and I'll put a graph up here, basically, as you chart over the years, they get skimpier and skimpier. It's still
Yeah.
not that skimpy, but, they just are more lax, just like all of Mormonism. When I went to go walk around Colorado City, where the FLDS were for a very long time, they still do the garments to the wrist and to the ankle, and they
Yeah.
start wearing garments around 3 or 4 as children, basically like long johns or whatever. But I definitely think that is one way. Even the church is kind of almost engaging in a loophole to say, oh well, we don't need to wear them as much. I think it started as exercise. You don't have to wear garments during exercise, but exercise has has gone longer and like the list of what qualifies as exercise has become more and more significant. Like the BYU cheerleaders, even though they're just like rah cheering, they don't have to wear garments with their outfits. Dancing, if you're doing like a tango or gymnastics, or
Yep.
a ballerina farm, when she did her pageant, she's not wearing garments. So now a pageant is kind of exercise, or it's a specific activity that doesn't require garments. And so it's almost like as soon as they said you don't have to exercise, you can take them off for exercise, then the floodgates opened as to what can qualify as exercise. And even like you were saying before we started recording, I've seen so many pictures of women. I have in my wedding dress, I had it, that was basically very much garment approved down to my elbow down, obviously to my feet. So I could wear garments in my wedding dress. But more and more, I'm seeing on TikTok girls who are wearing wedding dresses that are, it's like they're going in the temple, they're putting on their garments, they're getting married in their the patriarchal grip with the full temple clothes, and then they're changing back into a dress that they can't wear garments in for the day of their wedding, which to me is like, if we're gonna queen a loophole other than soaking, that has to be like the king soaking, queen women wearing tank tops out of the temple for their wedding dress. It doesn't make sense to me.
That honestly, I don't even know how that's a loophole. So that was another thing that Summer showed me. She was like, "Look at this dress," and she's seeing friends' kids getting married, immediately coming out. So she sent me an Instagram. Emily Moore Simpson, Real Housewife of Orange County, her stepdaughter got married, comes out in a strapless dress. And I'm like, damn, like how can you justify that? Because growing up, I would have been given the shirt of shame, the shame shirt. Like, you put this on, you immodest, sinful little whore. Like, what are you thinking? And I think it's great that this younger generation is like, screw you guys, I'm going to wear whatever dress I want. But also, it doesn't even make sense. How is it possible that they're allowing her to go in, be endowed with getting the garments? That's the whole ceremony. I vowed to wear this covenant, da da da. And then immediately taking them off? I don't understand.
Yeah, I feel like some of these new versions of social media Mormons are almost like you can't identify that. Like I feel like if I was, if I'm going to get mad, I'm not even necessarily going to get mad at the Mormon swinging mommies, because at least they're being upfront with the fact that, hey, we are doing this and we're Mormon. You can take it or leave it. But I feel like almost like what seems to be to me like more sneaky version of, we are going to go get married in the temple and then wear a strapless dress out of the temple, is somehow less intellectually honest than a woman who's like, yeah, I don't have a temple recommend because I'm swinging. So that like, at least that's a level of maybe like, I'm culturally Mormon, or like,
Sure.
at least they seem like they're being honest with themselves. But I feel like the girls walking out of the temple with the immodest dress, it feels like they're not even maybe being honest with themselves. I think growing up at girls' camp, if girls wore a two-piece bathing suit, they'd be asked to go back and change, or their parents would have to come bring a one piece. And even if the one piece was too revealing, then they got a t-shirt to put over the one piece. And this is an all-girls camp. An all-girls camp. Why do you need to be so modest at an all-girls camp, especially if lesbians apparently don't exist, So.
Right. I was in the singles ward, and I got shamed for a one piece that had cutouts on the side. Meanwhile, my amazing, voluptuous, big-breasted best friend wore a two-piece, and no one said anything. And I was like, what is going, like, they just had it out for me. But I thought this was interesting. I wanted to read it. So this is on the church website, the official website. They're talking about the garments. It's called the Garments of the Holy Priesthood, I think. I don't have the full screenshot. But they're basically talking about why people wear the garments. They talk about Adam and Eve, like, oh, they must have felt so afraid when they jumped into a world of sin, and the garments are like protection, and they go through this whole thing. But then at the end, they're basically like, I know you guys have a lot more questions about garments that aren't answered here, because they didn't want to list all the things that you couldn't do, right? They're still trying to give people agency. But here's the funny part. It's like, I know you would love to ask Jesus himself personally, and you should. So pray about it, guys. But then they followed up with this. Please don't misunderstand. As you reach out for divine guidance, the Spirit will not, and this is in italics, will not inspire you to do less than follow the instruction received in the temple and the prophetic counsel shared by the First Presidency in their recent statement.
That's
And it
crazy.
keeps going like, a loving father will not help you rationalize. And it just keeps going. So again, it's like, search, ponder, and pray. But if you don't get the right answer, it's on you. Pray harder, because the Lord will not tell you to do anything other than what we're telling you to do.
That's so crazy, because I feel like that is the most common thing I see kind of echoed on social media when women are kind of called out for not wearing the garments correctly, is that, well, I prayed about it and I feel that the way I wear them is keeping my covenants.
Yeah.
And it's like, to me, saying I prayed about it and I felt the Spirit tell me it was okay is kind of the Mormon trump card. It's like the, the reverse
Personal
Uno card,
revelation.
where
Yeah.
no one, people struggle to kind of say, no, you didn't get personal revelation. But I think when they go that far, when they're willing to go so far as to say, you won't receive revelation that we didn't say you could receive, is when they're really doubling down. So that is kind of crazy,
Yes.
expressly saying God will not help you rationalize wearing the garments incorrectly, when so many women are
Yeah.
saying that.
It's funny too that they don't explicitly say the rules. At least I didn't come across it in this article. They're like, I know we didn't answer your questions, so you can pray about it. But when you pray about it, make sure you receive the answer that you get in the temple. So we're not going to tell you all of the rules. You kind of have to figure it out. Depends on your bishop. Pray about it. Go to the temple, and they'll tell you what the rules are at the time. Because it's like they don't, because they're always changing, right?
Yeah, and they never want to, it's like they never want to say it too specifically. Like when I was growing up, they always referred to being physical with your boyfriend or girlfriend as necking and petting.
Like, who knew what
And
that meant?
yeah, no heavy necking or petting is the phrase that was tossed around the most. And necking, okay, I've no first of all, what the heck is that? And petting, I pet a dog, and that's fine.
Yeah.
So like, what, I just remember trying so hard to figure out what on earth that could be referring to, necking and petting. It was like there's no other really context clues that I could use to figure out what they're referring to. And I feel like, on the topic of other loopholes, the on my mission, sometimes men would refer to having a wet dream as a tender mercy. That was like the code word for
No, that's so gross.
yeah, I know.
That's no, a
The
tender
code word,
mercy?
yeah, disgusting. I mean, such a strange phrase to put on that. Or
Yes.
another common kind of masturbation loophole I've heard of is that of men getting Victoria's Secret catalogs and keeping it as basically porn, but because it's just the catalog, it's their loophole that they didn't purchase it, they didn't look it up, it was just sent to them, and they happen to
Mhm.
keep it in their bedside drawer. Oops, how did this get in here? So
Oh my
I feel like
gosh.
that's another loophole, is keeping a catalog.
That's so funny. Still, I'm stuck on the tender mercy thing. Just
Oh
the
my
verbiage of that. Like, I'm not against wet dreams, but tender mercy?
God.
No. No, no, no.
And I know you said that you've obviously spent a lot of time in Vegas. When I was growing up, one of the biggest rumors, myths, Mormon loopholes I heard about is that BYU students would go to Vegas and get married in a Vegas chapel for 1 or 2 nights, have sex, and then get the marriage annulled so that they could basically, that's their loophole, is getting married, having sex, getting divorced, so that they can get it out of the way. So I don't,
Yep.
to you, is that something you've heard of, and what have you heard about it?
So I didn't hear about that until after I left Mormonism, and I thought it was hilarious. No one ever brought it up to me. The Mormon population in Vegas was very, very large when I lived there. I don't know if it still is, but I was told that there were more Mormons in Vegas than Utah at the time. And I
Wow.
I said this super cringy Mormon thing of, well, that's because we need the saints to balance out the sin. Oh, so embarrassing. So I don't remember hearing of that, but I wouldn't doubt that it happened.
I think in Vegas, the sin is winning.
The sin is definitely outweighing the Mormons for sure.
Same as my research into soaking. When I've tried to do research into the Mormons getting married in Vegas thing, it's like almost every voice is saying it's made up, it's made up, it's made up. And then, but then you can still find people who say, yeah, you did that. And
Yeah.
I feel like there's enough people who are kind of, like we said, fetishizing Mormon repression online that you can never quite be sure if those people who are making those posts, who they are, if they're really Mormon, if they're, if they were raised Mormon, or if they're just someone looking to kind of stir up trouble, or someone
Yeah.
who's looking to get some responses and, fill up their own little whatever they're looking for online. The only other loophole that I wanted to note, which I kind of, as I was brainstorming, this one isn't sex specific, but have you heard of something called VidAngel?
VidAngel. Why does that sound familiar? Tell me about it.
So it's a special software, I guess, that basically takes, I don't know if it's a software or if it's humans that are doing the edits, but basically they watch rated R movies or rated,
Yes.
NC-17 or whatever. Basically they're taking movies
Hmm.
and they edit out all of the bad parts, so like the sex scenes or drug use or swearing, and then they put it all back together, and then that is what Mormons watch. So I know many Mormons, and I have seen videos on VidAngel, who they'll want to see a rated R movie, but they take and they go on and they get a subscription to VidAngel, and VidAngel takes all the bad parts out, and you can, even on VidAngel, you can edit it so it's like takes out just sexuality or sex, or it just takes out swearing, or only, or it makes it PG, or it makes it PG-13, so it allows editing of the video so that they can watch the rated R video or movie while still being, good and following the rules. Because one of the Mormon
Oh
rules is,
my
of course, no
gosh.
rated R movies.
Yeah, I remember Not Somali Mormon ladies, Katie and Sarah, talking about that. And I think Sarah was saying that she would watch movies that way and all the context was gone because, like, what do you have when you take all that stuff out of an R-rated movie? Probably not much of a storyline.
Yeah, I think there are some movies I watched that, like, the original movie was an hour and a half, and by the time we saw it, it was like 45 minutes long. And
Oh,
it
geez.
really does, like soaking, you're like, what's even the point at this
What's
point?
the point?
Let's just watch the movie, for God's sake,
Oh
But
my
yeah, it does
gosh.
take quite a bit out, depending on the movie.
Yeah, I never got to that point. I'm so happy that I left at 19. I'm happy that I had a really ridiculous bishop. I guess I could say that because he led me straight out.
Good. Yeah. I mean, I think that to some that was your own tender mercy.
No, not the tender mercy.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have to have those experiences though to kind of, it's like we have to get slapped in the face hard enough to be like, wake up, wake up, obviously this is wrong. And I feel like I had to have several face slapping moments to finally be like, maybe this isn't exactly what I thought it was, and it's time to move on with my life.
Yeah, exactly. For me, it was one huge slap. For other people, it's a bunch of little slaps until eventually they're like, my cheek is really sore. I should look into this. But yeah, it usually takes something to get you angry enough or upset enough or sad enough to get you to really question it. And to be clear for any Mormons, current Mormons who are watching, I did not leave because I was offended. I left because the offense led me to a lot of research that made me realize that it wasn't true and that it wasn't worth the pain and the suffering that I was going through. I know that's a common misconception. People are like, oh my gosh, you just left the church because you were offended, but the church is perfect and the people are not. No, the church isn't perfect. There's a lot of stuff going on in the roots and the history, which Alyssa covers in great detail. So we love you, Alyssa. Thank you for doing that. And if you want to hear about Alyssa's slaps in the face, we're going to be doing a live together where we talk more about her deconstruction and what life was like afterwards. So make sure to join us for that.
Yes, and today we're releasing our videos on the same day, so go to Cults of Consciousness as you finish this video to check out my interview. I talked about my experiences at BYU with all the crazy rules, and then my Mormon mission, which somehow had even more crazy rules, which we've touched on here, like never being alone, for example. So check out my interview on her channel. Is there anything else you want to share or talk about that we didn't get to?
I think we covered everything. I guess if you guys have questions, if you're watching and you're like, what about this? Let us know. Maybe we could do a follow up. Or If you have experiences soaking, earthquaking, or getting married in an olden Vegas, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's one of those unknowables. Like people always are asking stuff about, how many people join the church every year, or is the church shrinking, or there's certain questions. How much money does the church actually have? That when the church, it's not they're not reporting any of this. And I feel like when anything to do with sex is going to kind of stay a little bit of mythology, in my opinion, when it comes to the church, because it is so taboo. It
Yeah.
is such a difficult thing for people to even broach the subject, much less talk about openly, that we're really never going to get to the bottom of this. But certainly many people will try, including us. And so
Yes.
thank you again for coming on. Just a reminder to everyone, please check out the interview I did on Cults to Consciousness earlier. We're posting it at the same time. And as always, I will see you all next week.